The night was silent, yet heavy with emotions that could not be put into words. Imagine the narrow streets of Istanbul, where the dim light of old street lamps stretches across the walls, and the sound of the sea lingers in the distance. Inside one of those houses, Can Yaman sat in silence, his thoughts restless, his heart torn between pride and regret. He never imagined that someone would wait for him that night, but she did. Demet Özdemir, the woman whose presence had once been his greatest comfort and whose absence had become his deepest wound, stood outside his door. 4 hours. Without saying a word, without leaving a note, she simply waited. It wasn't the first time their story had been marked by silence. Their entire relationship had been a balance between passionate fire and unbearable distance. They both knew what it meant to love with intensity, but they also knew what it meant to hurt in silence. That night, Demet's waiting was more than an act of longing. It was a confession without words. Her presence outside his door said everything her heart could not bring itself to speak. Neighbors who happened to pass by noticed her, standing there in the cool night, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her phone in her hand but never used. Some thought she was waiting for a friend, others believed she had lost her way. But Ken knew. Deep inside, behind that closed door, he felt her presence. He heard the faint sound of her heels against the pavement, the occasional sigh when the cold wind brushed against her face. He knew she was there, yet he could not open the door. What kept him from opening it? Was it pride? Was it fear of facing emotions he thought he had buried? Or was it the knowledge that if he saw her again, all the walls he had built around himself would collapse in an instant? For Can, that door was more than wood and metal, it was the fragile barrier between the man he had become and the man he once was when Demet was beside him. And Demet? She waited because she hoped. She waited because love, no matter how broken, still had a voice that whispered, maybe he'll come out, maybe he'll look at me one last time. Hours passed, the street grew quieter, but she remained. Her eyes fixed on the door, her soul trapped between wanting to knock and fearing rejection. This moment, untold until now, was perhaps one of the rawest and most human moments in their story. Not captured by cameras, not written in headlines, just two hearts divided by a closed door, and the silence of the night bearing witness. As the hours stretched on, the weight of time pressed heavier on Demet's shoulders. Every passing minute outside that door was like a silent scream of everything she could not say aloud. She had rehearsed the words in her head, words of forgiveness, words of longing, words that would pierce through the silence if only he opened the door. But her lips remained sealed, her voice trapped in her chest. It wasn't pride that kept her quiet, it was fear. Fear that if she spoke, her trembling voice would betray her, and he would hear the truth she had tried so hard to hide, that she still loved him. Inside, Ken sat motionless, his phone lighting up the room with the dozens of messages from friends, from colleagues, from the world that always demanded his attention. Yet none of those words mattered. What mattered was the one message he didn't receive, the one he secretly longed for, from the woman outside his door. But she didn't text. She didn't call. She waited. Her silence was louder than any words she could have written. And he felt it. There were moments when he almost rose from his chair, when his hand reached toward the handle of that door. But each time, something held him back. Memories came rushing in, memories of laughter on set, of playful glances, of arguments that turned into long silences, of promises made under the stars. They had been more than just two actors playing roles. They had been real. Too real. And it was that reality that scared him the most. To open the door meant reopening the wound. To see her again meant admitting that no matter how much he tried to move on, a part of him still belonged to her. Demet shifted her weight, her legs aching from standing so long, but she didn't leave. The cold air wrapped around her, yet she stayed as though rooted by an invisible force. Neighbors peered curiously through their curtains, whispers circling quietly in the building. Why is she still there? Who is she waiting for? But she ignored them. For her, it was not about who saw her or what they thought. It was about him. The man behind that door who had once been her everything. The night deepened, and with it, her hope flickered between life and death. At times, she imagined the door opening, his eyes meeting hers, the silence breaking with a single word, "Come in." At other times, she feared he would never appear, that she would wait until dawn only to walk away defeated, carrying her heartbreak into yet another day of silence. What makes this story untold is not just that the world never knew, it's that Can himself never fully admitted it. He never told anyone that he felt her presence, that he sat on the other side of that door with his heart in turmoil. To the outside world, he was strong, confident, untouchable. But inside those four walls, he was a man fighting against his own desire to run to her, to embrace her, to erase the distance that had consumed them. And as Demet's phone battery slowly drained, as her eyes grew heavier with exhaustion, she realized that sometimes love is not about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Sometimes it's about waiting outside a door, hoping it will open, even if it never does. That night was not about words. It was about silence. It was about two souls who still belonged to each other but could not bridge the space between them. A space measured not in meters, but in pride, in fear, in unspoken truths. And so she stayed, and he remained behind the door, both prisoners of their own hearts. The night crept slowly toward dawn. The city outside was asleep, but for Demet and Can, time felt frozen. The dim glow of the street lamp cast long shadows on the pavement where she stood, her figure still, her heart restless. Her phone had gone silent long ago, her notifications muted, as if the world itself understood that she had no need for distractions tonight. Her only focus was the door in front of her, the door that separated her from the man who once knew her heart better than anyone else. Inside, Can sat by the window, the curtains drawn just enough for him to see the outline of her body under the pale light. He hadn't meant to look, but curiosity betrayed him. And once he saw her, standing there with the kind of patience that only true love could fuel, he couldn't look away. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to get up, to walk across the room, to open that door and end her wait. Yet his legs felt heavy, chained to the floor by doubts and what-ifs. What if opening the door meant falling back into a cycle of passion and pain? What if they could never escape the past, no matter how much they wanted to start fresh? Can wasn't afraid of Demet, he was afraid of himself. Afraid of the way one look from her could strip away the armor he had spent years building. Afraid that if she spoke his name, he would collapse into her arms without hesitation. Meanwhile, outside, Demet's mind wandered through memories like an old film reel. She remembered the first time he made her laugh so hard she couldn't breathe. She remembered the nights they would sit in silence, sharing nothing but each other's presence, knowing that was enough. She remembered the fights too, the harsh words, the slammed doors, the tears she tried to hide. And through it all, one truth remained: no matter how much they hurt each other, no one had ever made her feel as alive as Can had. That was why she was still there. That was why she couldn't walk away. The air grew colder, and a faint mist rose from the ground as the hours dragged on. Her body ached, her lips trembled, yet her determination never wavered. She whispered his name once, so softly that only the night heard it, "Can." It wasn't a plea, nor was it a demand. It was simply the truth. A truth that existed beyond pride, beyond anger, beyond everything that had broken them. Inside, Can closed his eyes when he heard the faint sound. His heart clenched, his hands trembled. It would have been so easy, just a few steps, one turn of the handle, and he could see her again. But he didn't move. He was paralyzed by the thought that maybe she didn't come to reconcile, maybe she just wanted closure. And closure was something he wasn't ready for. Because for him, their story wasn't over, even if the world believed it was. The irony of the night was cruel. Two people who had once shared everything now stood on opposite sides of a door, both aching, both longing, yet neither able to break the silence. Demet's tears finally escaped, trailing down her cheeks in the quiet of dawn. Can's eyes mirrored her pain, though she couldn't see them. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window, listening to the silence that spoke louder than any confession. As the first hint of sunrise painted the sky, Demet realized she could not wait forever. Love had given her the strength to stand there through the night, but pride reminded her she could not beg for something he wasn't ready to give. She took one last look at the door, her heart heavy with everything left unsaid, and whispered to herself, "If he loves me, he will come." And with that, she turned slowly, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. Inside, Can felt the shift, the absence where her presence had been. He rushed to the door, his hand trembling on the handle, but he didn't open it in time. By the time he gathered the courage, the street was empty, and all that remained was the memory of the night she had waited for him. The sun had already risen, painting the city in shades of gold, but for Can, the morning brought no warmth. His home, though filled with light, felt darker than ever before. He walked to the door at last, his hand resting on the handle that hours ago had been the only thing separating him from her. But now it was too late. When he finally opened it, there was nothing. No trace of her footsteps, no sound of her breath in the air, only the silence of a street that had already moved on from the night's quiet drama. He stepped outside, his chest heavy, and looked left and right as if she might still be there, hidden by some miracle. But she was gone. All that remained was the ghost of her patience, the echo of her whispered name, and the truth he could no longer deny: she had waited for him, longer than anyone else would have, and he had not been brave enough to meet her. Inside again, he collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. He thought of the hours he had wasted behind the barrier of pride, of the countless times he had silenced his heart when it screamed for her. And now that silence had cost him more than he could bear. For the first time in years, Can Yaman cried, not for the man the world expected him to be, but for the man he still was inside, a man hopelessly tied to Demet Özdemir. Demet, on the other hand, walked away with her head held high but her heart in pieces. She had given him everything she could that night, her time, her patience, her unspoken forgiveness. And though he hadn't opened the door, she understood something profound. Sometimes love is not about being let in, sometimes it's about proving you were willing to wait. She didn't resent him. She didn't curse him. She simply carried the weight of that night as one more chapter in their story, unfinished, untold, but unforgettable. Weeks later, in an interview, Can was asked if he ever regretted anything. He paused, his eyes clouding with emotions he couldn't quite conceal. He didn't give details, didn't mention names. He simply said, "There are moments in life when silence costs you more than words ever could." Those who knew, knew. Those who didn't, could only guess. But for him, the image of her waiting outside his door for hours would forever remain etched in his memory, haunting him more than any scandal, more than any heartbreak the world had seen. This is the story he never told. The story of a night when love stood in the cold, waiting for him to be brave, and he failed. The story of a woman who loved him enough to wait for hours without a word, and a man who realized too late that some doors should never stay closed. And perhaps that is the cruel beauty of their bond. No matter how much time passes, no matter how many doors remain shut, the truth of their love cannot be erased. For love, when real, doesn't vanish. It waits. It lingers. It becomes the untold story that follows you forever.